Hey, what's up, guys? We're here with Nick Page. Nick is joining us from his home studio in the beautiful state of Washington. That I'm just assuming, Nick, like from your images, that it is beautiful. I've never even been to Washington, so.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I live in the southeastern corner of Washington State, which is very different than what most people picture. When they picture Washington, they picture lots of like rainforests and Mount Rainier and waterfalls and stuff. But I live in the southeastern part, which is more known for just like tons of agriculture. But I'm really close to an area called the Palouse, which is kind of like the Pacific Northwest Tuscany, right? Where you got lots of rolling hills and wheat fields and canola fields, just a lot fewer people. So it's pretty here during certain times of the year, and other parts of the year, not so much. It turns into like a barren wasteland after all that wheat has, been cut. It's just like rolling hills of dirt, which isn't quite as pretty.
It's the best kind of hill. It's the
Yeah,
dirt hill.
the dirt hill.
Well, you're from Washington. Anybody who's watching live, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're listening to the podcast, thank you so much for listening. Nick, the last time we spoke on the podcast, and you're the first repeat guest on the podcast, so welcome in.
Pretty much
Um,
makes me a big deal. Pretty much.
Pretty much, my office is mahogany, so that's what it is.
Yeah.
Um, I just wanted to ask. That was pre-COVID, and a lot has happened since then.
What's
Obviously,
what's COVID? I haven't heard
what
of
is
that.
that thing? What is that virus?
Yeah.
What what did COVID do to you as a photographer, and how did it change your approach to photography?
Eh, There's a loaded question. So COVID, well, so my photography, it changed it in the way that it deflated it a little bit because I'm terrible about this, but it's true and being 100% transparent that like when you have big crazy things happening in the world, suddenly my pretty pictures don't feel quite as important as they once did. Suddenly you start thinking more about like, feeding your family and like I hope I can put my kid through college. You start thinking about some of those bigger things, especially when there's wars and pandemics and all of this stuff. Suddenly I wasn't feeling quite as motivated to get out. But it did change my photography in the way that like international travel became a big stress, and just travel in general became super stressful and not, and it's more expensive and stuff. So it did make me shoot closer to home, and it made me reevaluate like when I'm out on a trip, like, do I need to eat in restaurants for every meal? Probably not. And do I need to stay in hotels everywhere I go, even though I have like a big fancy pickup with a roof tent and stuff? Like started getting a lot more frugal about how I travel. The last workshop that I just did, the hotels were crazy expensive. We're looking at like 270 a night for a Motel 6, which if you're not familiar with what a Motel 6 is, they'll leave the light on for you, but that's about it because because there's like they're not the nicest hotels. And like at 270 a night, as a workshop leader trying to make money, it cuts into the profits a little bit. So I started sleeping in my roof tent like, I had always intended on doing. And so it changed the way I traveled because I started thinking about, doing it a bit more frugally. Um, I don't even know what the question was anymore, but it's definitely changed like what I shoot, and then I shoot a lot more local, and it's changed like how I travel because I do it a lot more budget conscious than I once did. And I think that's a good thing because a person doesn't need to stay in a hotel every single night during the summer months when it's nice outside. Like we should be camping because after all, we are nature photographers, and implies that maybe we like nature. So it's encouraged a little bit more of that from me.
Yeah, when you stay in a hotel, you turn the light on and you turn on the AC in the hotel, and you're like, it's so nice outside. Well, why aren't you out there?
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
has it given you a deeper appreciation for your local places? Like you were just talking about the southern part of Washington where you're living in, and it sounded like, you have a little bit deeper emotional connection to those places now.
It does, although I think that it kind of evaluating why I do photography, which like I've been on this soul searching stretch for a little bit now, where like I start asking the questions of like, why do I do photography? I can do it, and I'm pretty decent at taking pretty pictures, but why do I spend so much time and effort doing it, and money? And what I've discovered in asking those kind of questions is it's not so much the place as much as it is the weather. So I've discovered that I'm more of a weather photographer than I am a landscape photographer. I'm more inspired and motivated to get out when I don't know what Mother Nature is up to. When you have storms rolling through, or where you have big waves approaching a coastline, and you get these interesting dynamic weather conditions. That's what excites me. Like that's when I actually like start like really researching like what the weather's going to do and all this stuff. That's what really gets me excited, more so than I'm going to go to a hill and photograph a mountain, because that mountain has been the same for millions of years. It's going to be the same for millions of years after that. But the weather that rolls through that is a fleeting moment in time, and that's much more exciting and compelling to me because of the part of that you have no control over. And as you get better at photography, I feel like you get more excited about the things that you can't control, because as landscape photographers that we set up on a tripod and we change our perspective and we're in control over everything, there comes a point where it starts to feel formulaic unless there's some things that are completely outside of your control. And that's what I get excited about. So this year I've discovered that I'm much more into weather photography. And for that reason, I've been like, taking some amateur I struggle with this word. I know I'm going to say it wrong. Meteorological courses and stuff. It. And see, I'm pretty damn intellectual. I've been taking some amateur courses and learning a lot more about convective storms and all of that stuff, because it's what excites me. And I find that like when you're learning about stuff that you're excited about, it in the end it serves as a creative boost to your photography. So I've been getting really excited about weather, and that makes me more excited to get out when the weather conditions are right. And I don't know if I answered your question, but I sure talked a long time.
Well, I think you definitely did, and it leads to a different question that comes to mind is like a lot of people I've seen, especially on social media, getting more into that like storm photography. I think it was last year when you went out and did like a big storm chase across the whole country, or even just parts of the Midwest and places like that. If somebody wants to tackle that and add that to what they shoot in the landscape, how do they go about that first? Like, what were your first steps?
So step one, buy life insurance.
Yeah.
Because it's the most dangerous type of landscape photography probably you could argue that you can do, because the thing that I realized quickly about storms in the southern plains is that they are a completely different animal than what I'm used to. Pacific Northwest, we have these cute little storms. Down there, they're just giant storms that just want to kill everything in its path, sometimes literally. So it's so super dangerous that you have to educate yourself, or at least be with someone that has that education, just so you can do it even remotely safely, because it's really easy to put yourself in harm's way when we're talking about, things like extreme lightning, severe lightning storms and tornadoes, and some of the stuff that those storms can produce is quite frightening. And if you go in ignorant of the possibilities, you're not only endangering yourself, but you're endangering the people around you. And that's one of the things that is kind of a bad part of, how popular it is to go out and storm spot or to storm chase, is that probably the biggest danger out there are other people. Because you can imagine, and what's crazy is you can go out in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, or nowhere, Oklahoma, out in the way far away from any town, and have a traffic jam because there's so many storm chasers out there. And there's nothing more dangerous than when, a tornado is on the ground and it's coming towards a highway and there's a traffic jam and you can't get away because you're on the one road and the traffic is not flowing. What do you do then? So that, and you can imagine what it's like to have thousands of distracted drivers that are not looking at the road, they're looking out the window at the storm, and it becomes a problem. So probably the most dangerous thing when storm chasing are other drivers, and so that part's scary. And you just gotta have to know, like, you always have to have like a escape route, which is crazy. What other type of landscape photography do you know of where you have an escape route? And like, before you even enter into this area, you have to already have planned out what direction the storm's moving, what roads intersect that, and then what roads will I be able to safely get out, because not all roads are created equally. Some are paved, some are gravel, some are dirt. And when you have a massive downpour of rain on dirt, they just turn to mud, and then you get stuck, and then you get ran over by a tornado, and that's not good either. So, yeah. So safety. All that to say, safety is the first thing that they need to work on. Safety and educating yourself on, like, how these storms develop.
We had Justin Sneed on the podcast, who he lives up in Minnesota, but he chases down through the Midwest.
Yep.
And I was talking to him after the show, and I lived in West Tennessee, I still do, and we just had like this huge front move through with derecho winds and all this crazy weather that came through, and there were a couple tornadoes. And I was like, hey man, did you make it down there for that? And he said, no, I do not cross the Mississippi River to go shoot storms. There's way too many hills, way too many trees, visibility is terrible, and there's no escape routes anywhere. And I was like, okay, good to know for somebody who's been out trying to capture storms before and like trying to shoot my own area with storms. Who taught you that? Like, how did you approach another photographer to be able to learn those things?
So there's a guy named Mike Mez, or you might know him as Mike Mezuel II. And he's an incredible photographer all the way around, but he's really, really good at storm photography. He's also known for his volcano photography. He's a real safe guy. And he is incredibly knowledgeable about these storms. And like, the first couple times I went down by myself, and quickly realized how far out of my element I was. And so I reached out to him, and then I just kind of started shadowing him, because even though I'm good at photography, I'm not good at the weather side of things. And so he kind of has taken me under his wing, and like, I'm just trying to be a knowledge sponge around him, and trying to pick up on, like, why do you chase here instead of here? And why did a storm form here and not over there? Those kind of things, because that stuff is really important. But one thing I do want to point out, though, is that there's a big difference between being a photographer that likes photographing weather and being a storm chaser. Because a storm chaser, they have a one-track mind. They're after seeing a tornado. They're just tornado chasers, essentially. And for me, I don't really care about seeing a tornado. I want to see a beautiful, dramatic scene with incredible, dramatic skies, but with a decent composition. And that's a completely different thing, because a lot of storm chasers, they go out and they have a field and a sky, and the sky might have a tornado in it, but there's zero foreground, and they don't put any effort into finding composition, really. They're out to just document a storm. For me personally, that's too far in that direction. I'm not there just to witness a storm. I want to happen to have the storm as my subject, but also have a nice composition that works. And that is really difficult, especially when you're in some random place that you've never been before. You don't know what's there. And even if you did know the area, there's no guarantee that there's anything there, because I don't know if you've driven through Nebraska or Kansas or Oklahoma. Like, there's just not a lot there. So it's slim pickings to begin with, even if you knew the place. So that challenge is kind of fun in its own self, because there's another thing you're not in control of, where the storm's going to be. And so as you get better at photography, you like to start trying to throw yourself little obstacles and hurdles and things to overcome, because those things you're not in control of often are the most liberating creatively.
Drove through Kansas once. I'm pretty sure it took me about a year to make it through the entire state.
It's a
At
little
least it
flat.
seemed like you go from like Utah, Colorado, Wyoming into Kansas and Nebraska, and you're like, wow, this got really boring really fast. So we talked about how you changed as a photographer during COVID. In that span of time, it's been about 2.5 years now. In that span of time, how did you see photography itself change and shift and adjust?
Hmm. That's interesting. I don't know if it's because of COVID or if it's because it's just the trend that was already in place, but there's definitely been a trend towards the smaller scene, the more intimate landscape photography. Everything in creative land, whether we're talking about music or art or photography, everything kind of ebbs and flows and has trends. And for example, when I got started, like HDR was still the big thing. Trey Ratcliffe was king of the world, and everybody wanted to be like Trey Ratcliffe doing the HDR photography. And then it changed from that. And right now, the trend that I see things heading towards are small scenes. Like everybody's out looking for mud cracks or looking for some small little scene to photograph and to tastefully process. And that's kind of the current trend. And I don't know if that's because that's just kind of what people had available to them because they weren't traveling as much, and or if it's just a reaction to the amount of over processed, crazy, grand landscapes that you tend to see on places like Instagram, or back in the day, 500px. Everything was like, you go over here, you turn the epic knob up to 11, right? That's how photography was for about 10 years. And I think that these small scenes are kind of like the palate cleanser to that, where it's kind of like things ebb and flow. Grunge came because there was too much hair metal and and too much big hair and makeup and hairspray, and so then we got grunge. I think we have small scenes because we had so many epic scenes for so long. I don't see myself going down that path. I'm going to try to keep the epic alive, but I want to do epic in like a tasteful way, which is a fine line to
I mean,
walk.
the music that you tend to share on social media, I mean, you're going more the epic route with that music style, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, I like to be excited about stuff, rather than like walking through life, hanging your head and being like, oh, there's some mud. I'll photograph the mud. Click. Nice. Yeah. I'm not ever going to be that person, because never in my once have I been like, holy cow, look at this mud. These mud cracks are incredible. Like this, yeah, they're mud cracks. They're pretty cool. But wouldn't it be cooler with like a big storm in the background, bro? That's where I'm coming from. I'm more excited about things that actually excite me. I guess
I
I'll put it
think
that way.
will the trend last?
I think every trend come as soon as a trend happens, it comes with its own expiration date. except for Polka. I'm sorry, that's an inside joke that only I'm gonna get. There's a song called "Polka Never Dies," and that's anyway. I really should not tell jokes that only I get. But but I think every trend comes with its own expiration date, and I think the intimate landscapes will definitely trend for a while, and then they'll slip away. And the same people that have always been doing those intimate landscapes will continue to do intimate landscapes, and they'll always be known for that. But the people that kind of just go with the trends, suddenly they won't see mud cracks as quite as exciting as they used to, and they'll move on to the next thing. Maybe it's those little transparent globes that were really cool on Instagram for a week, where you put the little globe out and you have the sun shining through and everything's upside down in the globe. Maybe those are the next big thing. I don't know. Maybe.
I'm gonna pre-order mine for sure.
Yeah, I think you
I don't
should.
even I don't even know what they're called,
You,
honestly.
you got to be ahead of the curve, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to predict these things when they come at you. When you see photography trends ebb and flow, like you said, I saw during COVID a lot of photographers get kind of overwhelmed and kind of depressed with a lot of their photography, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe not depressed is the best word to use there. Maybe it's more along the lines of fed up with how things were going. We saw camera companies not be able to produce the amount of cameras that were on order for them. Back orders happened, and I think that frustrated a lot of people who do it for the gear and love that part of the photography itself. The question I'm getting at is there going to be a point? We've seen photography kind of on the rise for several years now. When is the tipping point, and will there be one when it goes the other way, and will photography start to die?
Well, photography will never die. Photography is going to always be ingrained in, being human, especially now that we have these things right here, these little flat devices that, take arguably better photos than our big, expensive cameras. As these things get better, photography is only going to be done more and more and more. Will it continue to be done by our big, expensive black boxes? I think that there'll always be people that use those devices, but I think it's inevitable that there's going to be fewer of them simply because these things we already have. They're smaller. Even though they're expensive, they're cheaper, and it's easy, and I think the barrier for entry and the skill and ability needed to do photography well is only going to keep lowering. That hurdle is getting shorter and shorter to where, even our 75-year-old grandparents can easily step over that hurdle just by picking one of these up, opening the phone app and taking a photo, and it looks pretty good. I think that fewer people are probably going to take it as serious as we do, where they're dumping the kind of money that we do into photography. And I think it's going to change, but I think it's always going to be a thing. And also outdoor recreation in general has been climbing like crazy lately. And I think that's, personally why I probably shot quite a bit less during 2020, 2021, simply because there was just so many people out, especially during the summer months where, during 2020, about the only thing that you could do is go outside and go camping. And because everything indoors was shut down. So the outdoors was just flooded with all these people. And it kind of crowded out some of the people like me that, I go, call me crazy, but I go out in nature to get away from people, not to go let's just move the city into the forest. I don't like that. I'm too much of a loner. So I don't want to go into a forest just to be surrounded by people. So I think there was some people like me that got kind of crowded out of nature there for a while. But I think that as outdoor recreation continues to gain in its popularity, there's going to be more and more photographers. It's just a matter of whether they're going to be using this little thin box or our big expensive $4,000 black ones.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think that we will see more of it move that direction. Even myself, if I'm filming a video for YouTube,
it's really hard. I mean, these things do a better and better job, and it starts to be really difficult to justify packing my video camera around when this does pretty good and it's way lighter and I've already got it, and you don't have to do any editing. It's just and I think it's only going to get more so that way.
I think it even begs the question for a lot of people who maybe want to do photography, even if it is just side income and doing it a little bit, maybe selling some prints here and there at a local art show. With so much information, so much technology being more accessible and more affordable, is photography even a viable career anymore, and will it trend that direction?
I mean, if you're into selling prints, there's a lot of competition out there. But the difference is that not everybody is going to produce nice prints. Not everybody knows how to post-process properly. Now, there's a lot of competition out there, but I don't know if it's just that my eye has gotten better or whatever. But when I go to the local coffee shop, or when I'm traveling and I see prints in a gallery on the wall, I can still critique them pretty well. And it's usually the difference maker is not the camera that they were using, it's the post processing that they did or overdid or underdid. You know, I think that as people get more and more spoiled by how easy the technical side is and how capable our cameras are, they tend to get a little bit more lazy with the post processing side. So there, for a while, anyways, there's going to be that differentiator. That's another hard word. That's going to be post processing, because not everybody is willing to put in the time to learn it. And so many people are like, they learn Lightroom and then they call it a day. And granted, Lightroom is pretty powerful, but it's not anywhere nearly as powerful as Photoshop. So like, there's always going to be that differentiator with the post processing ability, I think.
What does somebody need to know if they've reached that limit in Lightroom and they kind of see it like, okay, I've done this so many times, hand over foot. What's the next challenge? Like, where do I go when I go into Photoshop? Because Lightroom, like you said, is so powerful. We can basically, a lot of the photos, even I edit, like, I'm like, okay, this is a good edit. Like, this is a good edit. I don't even know if I have to use Photoshop. Now, if I do use Photoshop, it always looks a little bit better after I get done using it. But if somebody wants to make that jump, what do they need to do?
Well, like in one of my most recent videos, I talk about how you learn Photoshop the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So, you know, especially like as easy to learn and as intuitively laid out as Lightroom is, most people, once they learn Lightroom, they never really feel comfortable leaving it anymore, because it becomes their little safe place where they know how it works and they know all the tools. And then you have Photoshop that is almost intentionally laid out in a difficult to learn manner, just to keep the, you know, to keep the plebs out of their sophisticated little app, you know. And I feel like it's almost intentionally hard to learn. So the thing is, you just have to learn it one little bit at a time. So for me, the first things that I learned were like, okay, the clone stamp tool, or the content aware fill abilities when I shoot a panorama and I need to fill those little odd empty spaces, or like, you know, it's so much faster for getting rid of sensor dust. Sensor dust is just like boop and it's done. And then you do it in Lightroom, you go boop, and then you wait 3 seconds for it to render, and then it picks a spot, and then that spot was stupid, and then you have to move it, and then it's the ability to, the spot healing brush in Photoshop blows away the Lightroom one. So the very first thing you should always learn is the spot healing brush in Photoshop, simply because it's a time saver. But then you start to learn that, like in Lightroom, they're starting to add things like you can select the sky now, and you can darken the sky. But the problem is, it's not a great selection of the sky. It's a pretty good selection of the sky, but it's not a good selection of the sky. But it's good enough for them, you know. And so many of the little tools in Lightroom are like almost what you need, but not quite. Like, so if you use them tastefully, you can kind of get away with it. But like the range masking, because I'm a huge luminosity mask nerd, and so one of the questions I get asked all the time is like, yeah, but you know, Lightroom's got range masking. And I'm like, yeah, it does. It's kind of like, it's like trying to carve with a sledgehammer. You know, it's like close to the tool, but not quite the tool, and you don't have much flexibility or power over it. So everything in Lightroom is getting close to being good enough, but it's just not. And there's just so much that you can do in Photoshop that you'll never be able to do in Lightroom.
They probably make it that way, honestly, so that you have to get both.
Yeah, there you go. And, you know, it's a good business model, because I use both. I use Lightroom to import and catalog and organize. And then when I have like portraits and stuff, it's fine for that. But then when I have my landscape photography, I need Photoshop, because once you get used to the amount of control and, you know, the just selections in general, working with selections, if you had to pick one thing, and working with layers in Photoshop, once you get used to that, everything else just seems archaic. And it's like, I can't believe people edit this way. But it becomes impossible to backtrack and start using something where you don't have that power.
You mentioned luminosity masking. That's where I was going to go next, and so thank you for leading me that direction. When you Well, let me ask it this way. Why are you so bullish on luminosity masking?
Just because it's better in every way.
It's because
No,
it's better, bruh.
it's better, bro. So yeah, luminosity masks. Like, okay, so what makes Photoshop is the fact that you can work with layers, you can have layer masks, and you can have selections. So when you're working with a selection, you can be very particular over like, okay, I want to brighten, but I want to brighten this rock, only this rock, nothing else, right? And you can make a selection of that rock, and then you can refine the selection of that rock so it's absolutely perfect. Now, with luminosity masks, it's like you can use it in every bit of a local way, meaning, okay, I'm going to brighten this rock. But with a luminosity mask, you can only brighten, you can select to only brighten the highlights in that rock. So you can have affect not only the area, but also only the tones. And you can adjust that in infinite number of ways to where like it's not only the area, it's not only the tones, but it's only the warm tones, or it's only the shadow cool tones, or any combination that you can think of. Like, okay, I'm going to darken the sky, but I'm only going to darken the blue parts of the sky. I'm going to leave the red parts of the sky alone, and I'm going to make a selection of the shadow areas of the clouds and darken those a little bit. And I'm going to limit that, all of those adjustments, to only the sky by making a selection of that sky and throwing it inside a folder. That way you're masking a luminosity mask, and you can also paint through luminosity masks and use them like luminosity selections. So it's like this stencil where the paint is only going to go where you choose to paint, but it's also going to only go into the tones that are selected. So, I mean, it's infinite what you can do with them, and that's why I'm so bullish on it, is because once you learn it, then this light bulb goes off and you're like, oh my god, so much is possible, and I'm going to be a good photographer someday. Because like I always push people towards learning that stuff because it's the best and it's the most powerful, rather than just saying, well, here's top 5 tips on how you need to learn these 3 tools in Lightroom, because that's easy. You can always learn those 4 tools in Lightroom and you'll be okay. Or you can, dedicate, 6 months of your life and dedicate and learn something difficult that'll actually make you better, and you'll keep growing in that direction. Or you can use this like a little, it's like presets. It's like, here's a little thing that you can learn and you'll get a little bit better. And then once you're ready, I'll give you another little thing, and you just kind of hop from island to island, but you never actually get better because they're just islands. But once you learn a concept or, a set of techniques, the sky becomes the limit because your knowledge is only going to grow in that area. And then you'll learn all the things that are possible because that skill set.
Yeah, no, I think Duncan, whose comment is up on the screen right now, said it great. Lightroom was made simple and then got complicated. Photoshop was complicated, and you have to learn how to make it simple for you.
So true.
I mean, that's a great breakdown, and I'm gonna steal that from Duncan and actually use it in some of my tutorials.
Yeah, you should have copyrighted that, Duncan. You screwed up.
It's mine now.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like Photoshop, part of what makes it not intuitive for photographers is the fact that it's not just for photographers. It's for all kinds of, art creators and developers. And like you can do so much in Photoshop that is completely not relevant to what we do that it seems cluttery. So a big part of it is you only learn the stuff that is actually applicable to you and what you do with it. And then you can lay it out in a way to where you don't have to look at all that other crap, because the other stuff just gets in the way and slows you down. But when you have like your 7 things that you do or 7 things that you know how to do, and it's all just right there, not only can you have that stuff laid out, but you can also, like, things that you do often, you can set to an action. So like, I do an Orton effect almost every image I do. So I can create an action where I just click a button and it does my Nick Page special magical ethereal look in like 1 step, even though it's actually like 5 steps. and then it becomes even more of a time saver. And what's cool about Photoshop, because we're talking about why it's better, is the fact that like if you overdo something, you can see all your layers, and someday you can save it, save all your layers. Somebody orders a print of it, and then you come back and look at it, and you're like, my God, that's awful. And you can be like, okay, let's back off this Orton effect, because apparently the Orton effect was a big deal back in the 2000s, and and back off all of the things that you screwed up. And because you worked non-destructively with smart objects and all of these things, you can go back and, okay, let's warm up this color temperature a little bit. Maybe it doesn't have to be quite that blue, and you can do all of these things. And then you can just fade out some of the things that you overdid. Like, okay, we added too much of this. Let's just drop the opacity of that layer a little bit. And suddenly everything's good again. But like once you get used to being able to do that, and then you go back to Lightroom and you bring up your adjustment brush pins, and you just got these little dots all over, and you don't know what each one of them did. And you click on that one, you're like, and it's not nearly as good. It's not nearly as, it's just not as good.
In summary, it's just better, bro. It's just better. So we've talked about kind of the idea that photography, the death of photography. I do want to keep going down that route a little bit, just because I think it's a really interesting idea. Let me ask you this. Should photography kind of die to some people? And the reason that I ask that is because a lot of people chase photography, chase icons, chase specific photographs, chase specific weather patterns, but they don't internally like love it. They don't have that same feeling anymore of when they began. Should it die to them, or should they just get back to the basics of what they were doing when they started?
Well, I think it's only a matter of time before it does die to them, because if you lose touch with why you enjoy it in the first place, you're not going to enjoy it, and you're not going to do it. And for a while, I was worried that I was that person, but then all it really took was me reevaluating, like, okay, what was it that excited me so much during this time period or whatever. And so now I understand that the reason I'm not into photography all the time is because I don't get the conditions that excite me all the time. So I'm not excited about it all the time. And that's okay, because you can't do the same thing all the time and be fulfilled. I think that there's a lot of people that don't do it for reasons that are going to be fulfilling long term, and it's going to die to those people. And you might see, like, especially as times change and social media changes, now that, for example, Instagram is becoming more video centric than it once was, I think that there's going to be kind of a move away from photography, simply because TikTok's the new thing, bro. Like, how are you going to be big without like a 15-second dance clip? Like, you're just not. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people that we're kind of approaching photography from a little bit more like, I'm doing it because it's cool aspect. Those people are going to move away from it, and they're going to start doing their little 15-second like lip sync videos over something that, oh man, I don't understand humans. But you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people that do things because they're popular and they're cool, not because they actually enjoy doing it. They're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall, seeing what they're into, and like they give that a try, and then they realize, I don't really like that anymore, because that's not cool anymore, and I'm not getting the social interaction that I once did, so I'm moving on. Then there's the other people that, they find an actual outlet of some kind with photography. The people that find some kind of deeper emotional connection to it are going to stick with it because it becomes part of who they are. But I will say that you don't have to be the super philosophical, deep thinking, deep feeling person in order to connect with photography, because you can tell by listening to me talk that I'm not that person. I enjoy doing photography because it's time spent focusing on what I enjoy and what I love. And anytime you can spend time where all you're thinking about are the positives in life. Like, oh, I love that big cloud up there. And oh, look at that owl. That owl is awesome. And like, looking at all of these things that you like and you enjoy and you're hyper focused on that, you're just happier rather than walking through life of being like, I hate that and I hate this person and I hate politics and I hate all of these things. Like when you spend time doing that, you're a miserable person. And it's really not much more complicated than that. If you spend time thinking about what you love and doing what you love, you're going to be happier. And for that reason, photography is always going to be a thing. And it's always going to be an important part of being, human. Because, I think that all people are creative in some way. Some people are more, physically creative. Like they like to build things. They like to build houses and build decks and lay concrete and build basketball pads or whatever it is. Some people fulfill that creative need by physically building things. Other people are more, they paint. Some people take photos. Some people write songs. Everybody's creative in some way. It's an important part of being human. I don't know where I was going with this, but there you go.
It was basically what you were saying was look for the new TikTok channel from Nick Page.
Yeah, absolutely, bro.
He's got the moves.
It'll be called Sick Tones.
Sick Tones.
20,
coming to a screen near you.
Yep.
Well, you alluded to a time in which you thought that it had died to you. How did you pull yourself out of that?
Well, I mean, sometimes you learn more from failures than you do from successes, right? And sometimes when you go out and you go on a photo trip or you go on a photo outing that you expect to be like, this great thing that you've really been looking forward to, and then you go out and it's just kind of meh when you're out there, it makes you ask some questions like, okay, that was supposed to really be fulfilling and make me happy. Why am I not happy? And I had a few of those experiences where like I would go to, places that I used to love to shoot. And I know that I enjoy being there, but for some reason it wasn't creatively fulfilling to me. It meant that I had to ask myself, well, why? Is it that I don't like photography anymore? And the truthful answer was that like, some of those locations that are very much location centric, like let's say a waterfall. There's a particular waterfall that I love to go to, and I go to that waterfall. You go there maybe 5 times, and you get all the different variations that you can possibly think of. Then what? There's only so much that you can do with a waterfall because there's no changing element really. Maybe you can go once in the fall, and once in the spring, once in the winter time when it's like snowy, and then you can shoot it from all the different vantage points and think of all the different ways that you can include a little bit more of this tree trunk, or maybe I'll just shoot just the water. But eventually there comes a time where it's like, dude, I can't do anything new here. And it's just a waterfall and there's nothing changing, not enough. And I hadn't really realized that I'm not location centric, I'm not a landscape photographer. I'm more of a weather photographer. And that's also why I love seascapes, is because there's a changing element there. There's that sense of moment. At a waterfall, there's not really a sense of moment unless a kayaker goes off of it or like a fish jumps or something. Bird flies through the scene. Those are moments, and they don't happen really in waterfalls. But when you go to like photograph a seascape, every single wave that comes towards your camera is completely different. And so you can go to the same beach that you've been to a million times before, set up with a composition, and you can sit there and shoot this particular composition, hundreds and hundreds of times, and you don't even notice time's passing because every single water movement, every frame is different. You're like, well, okay, well, what if I go a little longer with my shutter speed? And that's got different energy, and you're photographing moments because it's a fleeting wave that's never going to happen exactly the same again. And then you combine that with whatever the weather happens to be doing. Those are two different variables that are never going to line up exactly the same way twice. And so suddenly that far more appealing to me, far more fulfilling, far more entertaining and just simply because of those variables. And so that was kind of what I discovered, is that like I just had to do some soul searching on like, why do I like this but I don't like that? And once you realize that, okay, this is actually quite fulfilling to me, and I don't even care if I get a good photo here because it's fun and I like watching the water movement, or I like being around, big storms where I feel like this tiny little speck of a human and nature is this big impressive thing. When if I'll be happier if I put myself in those situations, because this is what I actually love rather than just a pretty place. Because I like pretty places, but I don't necessarily like taking photos of the same pretty place over and over and over, because it starts to just feel redundant, and there's no variable there, and there's not really much of a challenge there either, because there's no desire, there's no need to be there during a particular moment. You can just show up on a Tuesday, take your photo, and it's going to look like every other photo that's ever been taken there. Maybe the composition will be slightly different. So those variables and those things that are out of my control. That's what I've discovered that I really love.
That can take a long time to just, it's easier to say it in, a 2 minute answer, 5 minute answer. How long, like years even, did it take you to figure that out, that you were a photographer who doesn't like places, but is more of a chaser of a fleeting moment?
I would say it's been something that I've slowly been realizing over the past like 3 years, something like that. And it wasn't really until I started spending a bit more time chasing those storms and like putting myself in those situations, because it's a very obvious difference in my mindset when like there's a storm rolling in, the lights happening, and I have to like try to find a composition. Suddenly my eyes get big and I'm fully engaged. That never happens when I'm going to a waterfall that I've been to before, or going to something that like, nah, the weather's okay, and like I'm gonna stand on that hill and take a picture of this other hill. Like that, there's nothing like engaging about that. But when you see the planets start to align and you have like this closing window where like I got to be in a good place when this happens, or else like I'm gonna miss it, like then you start to get fully engaged. And then like it's a challenging shooting situation, so I have to like make sure that I nail this, because I've only got this amount of time, and like eyes get big, pupils dilate, and suddenly you're engaged. And I hadn't experienced that with myself in a very long time, until like I went, storm chasing. And it wasn't even necessarily like the big storms, like, down in the lower plains. For me, I probably enjoyed monsoon season in Arizona more, simply because there were compositions to be had. They have all this beautiful cacti everywhere. And that makes for this beautiful silhouette when you have a saguaro cactus up against the sky for these, rainbows, unicorns, and lightning bolts falling out of the sky. Like it gets really entertaining when you have both composition and conditions. And that's what I love.
Ask the question just because, like, people can look at what you've done in photography. People can look at like my career in photography. People can look at, Alex Noriega, somebody like that, and say, well, they're really good. I'll never get that good. And it's easy for somebody to say that, but like it took me probably 11 and a half years to figure out what I loved about photography and what I wanted to get better at, and why I wanted to get better at. And I've been shooting for 12 and a half years. So it's only in the last year that I've really figured all of that out, and trying to do
Mm-hmm.
something like that. So I think when somebody looks at like you as a photographer, it's hard for them to have that perspective. Have you had moments like that
Oh
when you
yeah.
were looking at some of your favorite photographers?
Well, dude, I still feel that way. Like when I look at the work of, even though I consider him a friend, Michael Shainblum's work still blows me away. Like I don't tell it to his face when we're hanging out, but like, I worship the dude a little bit just because his photography is always so consistently good. And that's the funny thing, is like when you meet some of your photography heroes and you go out and you shoot with them, and then you like, especially Michael in this situation where like we're out shooting together, and I look over at him and he just looks like he's not doing anything. I'm like, are you gonna shoot this? This is beautiful conditions. He's like, cool, man. Yeah, that's real nice. It's pretty. And then he doesn't look like he's doing anything. And then, the following day or maybe that night, like he posts something from that shoot and you're like, what the hell? Like you didn't look like you were even trying, and look at this. And so the thing is that there never stops being those people that you look up to. And that's a good thing, because as long as there's people that you look up to and you see their work and you're like, man, I just love that. And I wish my photography had a bit more of that stuff going on. There's always, as long as that's still happening, there's always that opportunity for boiling it down. Like, okay, that speaks to me. Why? And then you break it down and you're like, okay, well, the overall contrast range of his photography is just so spot on and so beautiful. And then you can like kind of bring up like one of their images and then bring up one of yours that's similar in either in subject or in style. And you can kind of boil down like, okay, why do I like this better than I like this? And like I said, with every failure comes opportunity for growth. And as soon as you stop having those failures, your growth slows down. So as long as you still feel discontent with your photography, you're continuing to grow. You're a success, man. And it's those times when you look at your photography and you're like, that's as good as it can be. Like I nailed it. That's when you stop growing. So, and growing in photography or in any other pursuit is the fun part. It's journey before destination. There's another quote that nobody will get. Journey before destination. The journey of getting better at something is the fun part. The destination is a letdown most times. Like it's great to be a great photographer, whoop-de-doo, but like getting better at photography, that's the fun part. And getting better at anything is the fun part, because you look at yourself, you see that little bit of growth, and you give yourself a little pat on the back, like, okay, you got better at that one thing. Now we need to work on these other 10. And any photographer that you look up to and you see that difference between their work and your work, and you like their work better, that's an opportunity for growth. And you should embrace that because it's awesome.
Yeah. And I used to like get angry about it, right? Like I used to see somebody else's photo and I'm like, well, why can't I do that? But like you brought up Shane Bloom, I went to shoot the sand dunes when we were all out in Death Valley with him, and he literally, you described it perfectly.
Like
he was just like
anything.
He was just standing on top of a dune, like looking around, and I would like take a picture and look up at him. He'd be doing the same thing. This went on for an hour, and then I posted one of my my favorite photo from that evening. And he messaged me and he was like, is that the one you got from that night? And I was like, yeah. And the next day he posts his and I was like, what the heck, dude? Like, why you got to do that to me? But,
right.
But now I see it as, like you said, it's a growing experience. And I search for light that I don't necessarily see. Like I might take the initial shot, but then I search for the light that I've seen other people create. And I'm like, how did they do that? And the questions that I ask myself are then those growth periods that help me grow as a photographer.
And the beautiful part of photography is that it's not a team sport, and it's not something that you have to like invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars in a college education to really perfect. Like the only thing that really holds us back as photographers is just ourselves. The amount of time we're willing to dedicate to it, whether it's like getting used to our camera and getting used to the camera settings, the act of shooting, or the post-processing, or just our ability to, finely tune our eye. All of that can pretty much be done like whenever we feel like it. When I first got into photography, I didn't watch television for a long time. I watched tutorials because that was my idea of a good time. And the only thing that can hold you back in something like this is yourself, because you don't have to be smart. You don't have to be tall or strong or fast or good looking to be good at photography. You just have to put in some time. And the difference between those people that we look up to and are really inspired by, in my opinion, the only difference is the amount of effort that they've put into getting better. There's a book called The Talent Myth, and I'm very much a believer in the fact that there are physical characteristics that can make some people better at some things than others, especially in sports and things like that, or math. but when it comes to photography, like there's really not. Like you don't have to be good at math to be a good photographer. You don't have to be fast, tall, or strong. You just have to pour in some time, and then, and then constantly be in this stage where you like evaluate your work, look at work that you like better, and then evaluate the two and the differences. And you can work on your shortcomings. Like some people are very technically minded, like where they pick up the camera settings and all the menu systems, and they pick up that stuff really easily, and then they get out into a scene and they're just like, I don't see a composition here. But then there's the other people that like are just gravitate towards the compositional and the creative side, and they're really good at that, and they just suck with menu systems and camera settings, and like, because they're not interested in that. We can always work on our shortcomings, because it's usually one or the other. We're either technically minded but we struggle with creativity, or we're creatively minded and we struggle with the technical.
Yeah, let's wrap up with this. You just talked about growth periods, what some people are great at, what some people aren't. Let's take it, where are you going with your growth period in photography right now, and maybe into the next couple of years, and where do you see the next evolution of your photography coming from?
That's a hard one, because I'm not forward thinking at all. I I just wing everything. With my photography, like I said, I'm really getting into. I've been taking meteorological classes, and I'm a certified skywarn storm spotter now, and I foresee that kind of stuff being more and more important to me. And I don't want it to just be like, here's a wide angle landscape with a big epic sky. I want it to actually be refined and really well done, and eventually, hopefully, unique and its own thing. So, but I definitely want to put myself in those kind of shooting situations more. That way, I can kind of grow past the part where it's like, okay, here's a cactus, here's a cool sky, boom, take it together. I want to grow past that and see what happens. And what that means, I don't really know. Maybe it's a lot more time lapse, maybe something far more creative that I can't envision right now. But the more I know that I'm happiest when I'm shooting that stuff, and I plan on putting myself in those situations to the point where I don't feel obligated to take the obvious easy photos anymore. I can start to be more creative and grow past the first obvious part of it. And what that means, I don't know. But I don't want to put any preconceived notions on myself.
Yeah, final question. I'm going to take one from the comment section, and I've been posting comment sections periodically. You even got a shout out from Bree Stockwell for people to go buy your tutorials.
I appreciate that.
Kevin asks, we talked about Mike Mejuel. He's a very smart person, but I'm sure he doesn't want the 50 people who are watching live to go and send him an email and be like, hey, take me out weather chasing, unless they pay for his workshop.
Right.
He has any introductory resources you recommend for starting to be able to read weather forecasts for photography?
It's a good question. So the classes that I took were actually through NOAA. And if you just do a search for NOAA Skywarn, you can get your kind of foot in the door with like the Skywarn storm spotting stuff. And part of that is actually learning about convective storms and what a cumulus nimbus is and all of that stuff. But also there's so much, like anything, there's so much good stuff on YouTube, and pretty much anything you want to learn, you can find on YouTube, including like understanding the anatomy of a storm. And from a photography point of view, a lot of it is knowing which side of the storm you want to focus on. There's actually a guy, oh my God, I got to remember his name. There's a guy on YouTube. He's
Pressure's on.
He's on Texas. Pico. Oh, what is his name? Just do a search for uh, Texas Texas Storm Photography, and then enter a P. I'm pretty sure his name starts with the P. There's the how
It's probably like a G.
no, it's definitely a P, bro. It's like
Somebody says Petra.
Pico Hanks. I want to say it's Pico Hanks, not Petra. Definitely not Petra. It's
Okay.
Pico Hanks.
Pico.
But anyways, he's really knowledgeable. He's got a lot of vlog type stuff, but his educational stuff is really, really cool. And he talks about different types of lightning and different types of storms and the anatomy of a storm, but he's also a really good photographer. And so he's a great resource. I'm pretty sure it's Pico Hanks. I'm not positive though.
Well, there you go.
Picos.
Well,
maybe it's Picos Hanks. Yeah.
Maybe. Greg Fox, thank you. Summing up, where can people go to find out more about you? We alluded to your tutorials. Throw out a little rope for that too.
Well, so I teach a lot of post-processing stuff. As you can tell, I'm kind of I don't know, particular about post-processing. You can find all of that in my workshops and my photography, which is probably the main reason to go to my website. It's just nickpagephotography.com. Also got a YouTube channel with a huge back catalog that you can look through there. I've got some photographing lightning tutorials and those kinds of things if you're interested in that stuff. Or you can just Google me. But yeah, there's YouTube and my website, probably the best places to find me.
Several comments saying Picos Hank.
Yeah, Picos Hank. That's him. It's not
there
Pico.
You go.
It's Picos. And what's great about his stuff is like he's a very good photographer, but he's really knowledgeable and he shares all that knowledge about storm anatomy and all that stuff. So, his vlogs are okay, but mostly it's like the more educational stuff that I really like from him. So great source. That should be a good term. Like it's a YouTube resource. It's a U source.
A U source.
Yeah.
You need to patent that.
I need to patent it.
Well, I'm David Johnston. With that patent warning, on behalf of Nick Page, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for listening to the podcast later on, and those watching live. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick, and providing us with so many good resources.
Happy to be here. Thanks, man.